Welcome to this lesson on bibliographic description. In this lesson, we will be covering different topics. First, we will see the very concept of bibliographic description. What is meant by bibliographic description? Where do we find bibliographic description? How is it that we need to, why is it that we need to standardize bibliographic description? What have been the different efforts to standardize bibliographic description? And then briefly we will talk of how computers, when they came into the picture, how they have affected bibliographic description and how there is need for standards even for computer based bibliographic description records. And then we will talk very specifically about formats like the MARC format, which stands for the machine readable catalog format, which is one of the pioneering formats in the area of computer based bibliographic description, followed by other attempts like the CCF, that is the Common Communications Format, the UNICIST, that is the United Nations UNESCO's effort to standardize bibliographic description formats, and so on. The idea is that after this lesson you should be able to understand why standards are needed, what are those important standards, what are those different milestones in bibliographic description and the standards for bibliographic description, and of course, you should be able to understand how these have been applied in computer based systems. Let us begin by looking at the concept of bibliographic description itself. When we say bibliographic description, what we are really saying is that we are describing the details of a document to assist in identifying the document uniquely, including its location. For instance, in a library, merely saying the details of the document is not enough. You have also to say where that document is physically located. Accessing information about the content of that document, providing information about its physical form, and to retrieve that document in response to inquiries or requests for information. Now, you will see that this kind of description is created by several agencies. For instance, national libraries, they have to depend on describing bibliographic documents in their bibliographies. Similarly, publishers have to put bibliographic description about their publications in their catalogs. Abstracting and indexing services, these are agencies which provide again bibliographic descriptions of articles in journals, reports, etc. Similarly, computer networks, library networks and computer based library utilities have to provide bibliographic description. You will find bibliographic description in library catalogs, in bibliographies, in references in a book or article, publishers catalogs, computer databases. Now, there is need for standards in bibliographic description. Standards are needed because irrespective of who creates these records, standards ensure uniformity and consistency. With the use of standards, there is better possibility for exchange of these bibliographic description records between two or more systems. Now, when we say between two or more systems, we are talking of between two or more libraries, between a national bibliography and a library, or between two computer databases. Third important reason why we need standards in bibliographic description is so that there is better coordination possible between different agencies in ensuring better bibliographic control over what is being produced within a country or within a region or within a subject. It is important to have this kind of standards. Now, what are the different areas in which bibliographic description has been attempted to be standardized? First, a very important area is the entry element or the selection of headings, that is, example for instance author, that the main entry or other added entries should have. The second important area is what should be the different elements that should be present and what should be the order in which they should be present. This is again something that has been attempted to be standardized. Third very important area of standardization has been the form in which elements should be rendered. That is, should the author's name be given first, surname be given first, or should his first name be given first? All of us know that in any bibliographic description or library catalog, we always give the surname first, followed by the initials or the given name. Similarly, there is another important area of standardization, and that is the representation of subject content, that is also called vocabulary control. Let us briefly look at how many efforts have been done in the area of standardization. One of the earliest efforts was that of Anthony Panizzi, who developed a set of 91 rules to guide the cataloguing of books in the British Museum Library in London. This was a pioneering effort, and it helped people to catalog books consistently and uniformly. Subsequently, C.C. Jewett in 1850 developed his 39 rules. These also were more oriented to uniformity and consistency, and not necessarily on identification of main entry elements, added entry elements, and so on. Then very important development took place in 1876. This was by Charles Ammi Cutter, a well known figure in the area of library science, who developed his rules for dictionary catalogs. This included rules for the choice of headings and details of descriptive cataloging. Now, this particular effort of Charles Ammi Cutter greatly influenced later efforts to codify cataloging rules. The American Library Association, or the ALA, and the Library Association in the United Kingdom collaborated to produce the Anglo-American Cataloging Rules, or AACR, in 1908. This was a very important pioneering effort, and they drew a lot of inspiration from the work of Charles Ammi Cutter. In India, Dr. S.R. Ranganathan, who is considered to be a pioneer and the father of library science in India, developed his theories for the classified and dictionary catalogs. The classified catalog code and other principles enunciated by Dr. Ranganathan had a great influence on later developments in the standards for cataloging, not only in India, but also abroad. Very important event took place in 1961, and that was an international conference on cataloging principles, which was convened in Paris in 1961. This conference was important because it recommended principles for the standardization of headings. It also recommended that there should be a study on how computing equipment has an impact on cataloging rules, and vice versa, how cataloging rules should be amended or should be modified to suit computing equipment, computers. Now, a very important event again took place in 1971, and that was by the International Federation of Library Association, or IFLA. They had a program for the development of an international standard for bibliographic description, or ISBD, in 1971. Now, ISBD was envisaged not as a standard by itself, but really as a framework for the construction of national and multinational cataloging codes. Now, ISBD was a very important effort because ISBD provided a generalized structure for the description of bibliographic items, and ISBD was intended to provide the maximum amount of descriptive information required in a range of bibliographic activities. Elements which are required are set out in ISBD in 8 areas, with each area divided into very specific and discrete elements. We will briefly look at some of these elements. ISBD also specified the order in which the elements of a bibliographic description should be given, and very importantly the punctuations that should separate each element. Importantly, many codes, that is I am talking of cataloging codes, including the Anglo-American Cataloging Rules version 2 AACR 2, have adopted the ISBD as the basis for their rules for bibliographic description. ISBD rules are available for different types of materials like non-book materials, printed music, serials, etc. Now, these are some of the important milestones in the area of standardization of bibliographic description. Here is an example of a bibliographic description as given by the ISBD. For instance, the first first section is the title, the allergy connection, that is the title, and you can see that immediately after the title there is a punctuation mark, that is the slash, and then you have the statement of responsibility, that is Barbara Peterson, that is the author of this particular publication. Again you have another punctuation mark which is a hyphen, followed by the place of publication Wellingborough, followed by the place where it is located Northamptonshire, and then the publisher Thorson's, followed by the year of publication. You can see that each of these has a specific punctuation. After the year of publication you are seeing the collation, again followed preceded by a punctuation, 225 pages, 22 centimeters, and then there is a small note which says includes index, and then you have an ISBN number followed by the physical form. Here it is PBK, which stands for paper book, and then you have the price of the publication. So, you can see that this is a good example of how the various elements of the bibliographic description are shown, and how each element is separated from the other element by a special punctuation mark. When computers began to be used, it became all the more important to standardize the description of bibliographic items in a computer database. Why? Because this would help in automated exchange of bibliographic data. However, very importantly, in a computer based system, the concept of main entry and added entry became less important. In computer based systems, bibliographic records are created to store information about bibliographic items. What is a bibliographic item, or what is a bibliographic record? A bibliographic record is a collection of data elements organized in a logical manner to represent a bibliographic item. That is, when we say bibliographic item, we are saying that it could be any document. When you say document, it could be any kind of document. It could be a book, it could be an article in a journal, it could be a technical report, it could be an annual report, and so on. It could be part of a document. That means, for instance, a chapter in a document, a book, or a paper in a conference proceedings. It could be other records of human communication. For instance, it could be about a sound recording, it could be about a film, it could be any of these different kinds of documents. What is a record format? A record format is a formal structure or framework or arrangement, an identification of bibliographic data for the purpose of computer handling. That is, the computer will not understand a record unless it is formally structured, so that it is possible for a computer program to identify different elements of that record for the purposes of computer processing. Therefore, a format includes also rules or conventions to be used in representing bibliographic data. There could be different types of formats or structures. One very important concept is a record structure may be a fixed structure or a variable structure. A fixed record will always have the same number of fields or data elements of a fixed length. So, supposing there is a record with say 5 fields or data elements, a fixed record will say all these fields will have a length of, let us say, 10, 20, 30 or and so on. That means, they will have, each record will have a total fixed length and each field will have a total fixed length. On the other hand, a variable record can have a variable number of fields, with fields, each of these fields being of variable length. There are some structures which use both fixed as well as variable length fields. That bibliographic records have very many peculiarities or idiosyncrasies. First and foremost, there is a wide variation in the lengths of fields. For instance, in the titles of documents, there could be some documents with a which have a title of just 2 letters or 2 words. Okay. For instance, the good earth, that is 3 words, but there can be very long titles also. That means, you cannot fix the length of a particular title, it can vary from very short titles to very long titles. Another important idiosyncrasy or peculiarity of bibliographic records is, some fields may occur more than once in a record. For instance, there are documents in which there is only one author, but there are many documents in which there can be 2 authors, 3 authors, 4 authors, or in some periodical articles there can be even as many as 10 authors. So, these you cannot specify and say there should be only one author for a particular document. These could vary more than once, they could occur more than once. Another very important peculiarity of bibliographic records is that some fields may occur in some documents, but not in others. For instance, edition. All books do not have an edition, they will have an edition only if it is other than the first edition. So, you can have a second edition, third edition, fourth edition and so on. Similarly, a series statement is something that may occur in some documents, may not occur in some other documents. Another important peculiarity of bibliographic records is that some fields can be broken up into clearly defined subfields. For instance, the imprint field could have clearly defined subfields like place of publication, publisher and year of publication. Now, these are some of the peculiarities of bibliographic records. I think it is important to understand certain concepts in data organization. Now, you can start with the lowest kind of data organization, and that is characters. Everything is made up of characters like A, B, C or semicolon, full stop, these are all characters. Now, a set of characters together will make up what we call a field or a data element. For instance, after all, a title is nothing but a string of characters, and those string of characters may have a full stop, a semicolon or a colon and so on. Now, several related fields constitute what we call a record. So, when we say a record, we are talking of several fields of a particular entity, like a say monograph, constituting a record of that monograph. Now, several related records, when they are brought together, they become what we call as files, and several files of a particular related system becomes one or more databases. So, these are important hierarchies of concepts when you talk of data organization. Now, another important concept when it comes to computers is that when we talk of computer processing, we are talking of different types of formats in computer based systems. Now, first and foremost, there are what are known as internal formats. When we say internal format, we are talking of a format chosen by a computer program or by a computer system. These internal formats are process efficient, that means they have been chosen to identify so that the processing can be efficient. Then the next kind of format is the display format. What is a display format? Display format is these are the most convenient and efficient ways of displaying information for the user. This is what we mean by a display format. The third important format when we talk of computer systems is exchange formats. When we talk of exchange formats, these are intended for exchange of records between different computer systems. Now, let us briefly look at internal formats. What is an internal format? These are formats which a particular software, example a library automation software, chooses to use. They are mainly chosen for efficiency in processing, that is efficiency in storage and retrieval. This is an internal format is specific to a particular computer based system or a computer based software. Exchange formats, the purpose is to facilitate exchange of records between two or more systems. We want to take records from one system into another system, and therefore, we need a format which is understood by both these systems. They must be acceptable to different agencies. For instance, a national library should accept it, a local library should accept it, other kinds of services like abstracting and indexing services should be acceptable to them. And thirdly, they must be hospitable to different types of materials, because we are in a computer based system. You may be describing not only monographs, you will be describing sound recordings, you will be describing films, you will be describing other kinds of non-book materials and so on. So, any exchange format should be hospitable, so that it is possible to describe different types of documents. And lastly, an exchange format must be flexible for use in different software systems. It should not be specific to one software system or one operating system or one software language. Any language, any operating system should be able to use these exchange formats. Let us briefly look at exchange format structure and content. Firstly, any exchange format should have a defined physical structure. That means, it must have well defined rules for the arrangement on a computer storage medium like a magnetic tape or a magnetic disk or a CD-ROM. This structure is also called the carrier format. Then any exchange format should also have content designators, that is codes to designate different data elements. That means, for instance, a data element like author should be designated by a particular content designator. These content designators are also called tags. The exchange format should also have rules for the formulation of the different data elements. Now, there is one very important carrier format, and that is the international standard exchange format called the ISO 2709. This is a standard for bibliographic information interchange on magnetic tape, and it has the following elements. First, it should have a leader, it should have directory entries followed by variable length data fields, and finally, a record separator. We will briefly see how this looks like. Now, in this particular slide, for instance, I have shown that how the structure of the ISO 2709 is. It starts off, every record starts with a leader, which is a fixed length leader of 24 characters, and following the leader you have a directory. In the directory you have one directory entry for each field. So, supposing there are 20 fields in a particular record or 20 data elements in a particular record, there will be 20 directory entries, and each directory entry will is of a fixed length. Then you have variable data fields. Now, in the data fields record, the entire thing can be completely variable. So, you may have some records which are only 2000 characters, there are other records which can be 5 to 6000 characters. Now, this is an example of a bibliographic ISO 2709 format. Now, we will look at the directory structure. The directory structure, or really the directory entry structure, is again it has three elements. One is the tag, which is the content designator. Then you have length of the data field, and then you have the starting character position where that particular field actually begins. This is how the directory is structured. That means, every field which is there in the data record will have a directory entry, and this directory entry will have these three elements: tag, length of data field, and starting character position. We have now come to the end of this video lesson, and I hope you have been able to get a good picture of what is meant by bibliographic description, what are the different components of a bibliographic description, where these kind of descriptions are found, efforts at standardizing bibliographic description, and the concept of machine readable formats for bibliographic description, concept of a standard international standard like the ISO 2709. These are all important pieces of information so far as bibliographic description is concerned, and I hope you have been able to get a better picture of these different concepts. Thank you.